Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm François Picard. Our guest is the correspondent for The Economist in Paris, Sophie Petter. Welcome.
Thank you.
Back in March, you had a front page cover story. It was in the heat of the French presidential election campaign. France in denial. There you see François Hollande, Nicolas Sarkozy, a take on the famous painting by Manet, lunch on the déjeuner sur l'herbe, lunch on the grass. France in denial over the hard choices it had to make when it came to belt tightening.
Yes, it seemed to me during the presidential campaign that in France that almost all subjects were on the table except the ones that really mattered. And that's to say French competitiveness and how it was going to sort of restore its economic rank. And the other one was what it was really going to mean for France to keep to its deficit reduction targets. That's to say, where was it going to make the spending cuts and how was it going to do that? And those questions were pretty much left to one side during the campaign.
But that's politics. If you're a political strategist,
it's one way to get elected is not to talk about it, and that's possibly what you could say had happened to François Hollande. But the problem I was trying to argue then, and I've developed in the book, is that makes it much more difficult. And you made a lot of
friends making that argument.
Yeah, I think the reactions, which were quite hostile and aggressive in reaction to this cover, were part of that denial in a sense, because people didn't want to talk about it. Thank you very much. Could you just take your questions and go somewhere else.
And Sophie Petter has made more friends with her new book, which is published in French, in case the natives don't speak English. French Denial, The Last Spoilt Brats of Europe.
Oh, I think that's overstating the translation, but it's true that there's an element of France as an exception at the moment. I mean, in Europe, all across the Eurozone, you've either got countries that are currently being forced to cut a lot of spending and do it in a very difficult, hard, sort of tough way, or countries that in the past have engaged in the sort of reform that's enabled them to keep their social model. Look at Sweden or Germany under Gerhard Schröder. Did a lot of very tough things to put their economy right. And the only country where that hasn't really happened is France. And so France does enjoy this wonderful, apparently on the face of it, wonderful lifestyle, magnificent public services, a great healthcare, creche for everyone, retirement that is early. But at the end of the day, all that has been financed by building up debt over the last 20 years. And that at some point, it can't go on forever. And that's what the French are discovering right now.
The borrowing rate, you say that there's this apocalypse looming, but the borrowing rates for France have hit rock bottom, a historic low, a record low. Are the markets in denial?
The markets at the moment are treating France very favourably, but I think everyone's very conscious of the fact that market sentiment can change very fast. And if you looked at Italy or Spain 3 years ago and anyone said there'd be an explosion in rates on those countries' debt, you wouldn't have been taken seriously. So I think there is a concern that things could move. And what France, I think, really needs to do is to take this opportunity to make those kind of changes now, when there is a little bit of time and when the markets are treating France favourably, rather than waiting for things to go wrong and then finding that you're under constraint and you have to do it, you're being forced to cut. That's what's happened in Italy and Spain. Isn't it better for France to restore its competitiveness now? The really worrying thing is the divergence with Germany. If you look over the last 10 years, Germany has put in place things to make its labour market a bit more supple, enable companies to put people on part-time work during downturns and then bring them back into the market when there's an upturn. France doesn't have that kind of flexibility. And Germany has restored its competitiveness, and France has dropped out of the top 20 most competitive countries in Europe. And that's a real concern for France, or it ought to be. So I think, we are looking at what could be a real opportunity in France to do something. What I've tried to do in the book is show other countries have done it, It's not impossible to put in place those sorts of reforms that the French, I think, sometimes think, they can't do.
In the book, you give the examples you were saying about France has all these wonderful health. You say at one point, why does every township in France need a new stadium? You even say at one point.
I mean, the facilities are magnificent. This is France, and that's the way things have been done. But I mean, unfortunately, it's not been done because the country has created the wealth to finance all of this. It's been done by building up debt, and that's the difficulty. All across France, regions, departments, the levels of government, many of which have increased their staffing levels, even as the ones at central government have been reduced, to the point where that there is now a complete imbalance in the level of staffing in the public sector in France, and that's not affordable unless France creates the wealth in order to finance it. It can't do it always on debt.
Industrial action, we've seen a little bit of it in this country over the past few years. How do you go about taking things to the chop?
Well, I think the first thing, the country has to think that there's a need for change. There has to be a change in a sort of acceptance, public opinion, in the political class, that there is a need for change. And that's, I think, beginning to happen. I really do think, I do detect a change this autumn in the way in which these subjects are being discussed. And that's where I think there is an opportunity. People, and in this tiny little way, I'm hoping to contribute to that debate with this book by showing, it is difficult, yes, and France has a history of taking to the streets at the slightest provocation. But I think people are more lucid often on the ground in France than their political leaders are. And a lot of people I spoke to during the campaign, when I was doing my own reporting, in all sorts of corners of France, I think understood that things couldn't go on. They know what's happening in the rest of the Eurozone.
And when you go around France, you find a lot of companies that have 49 employees. Why 49 employees?
It's statistically an outlier in France, and it's quite interesting to see, because when you employ 50 people, suddenly a whole new packet of rules applies to you in terms of union representation and inspection, and various things make it much more difficult to run a company in terms of operations once you've got 50 employees than if you have 49. So this is, it's supposed to be to protect the employees. But what happens is that companies, in a way, almost keep themselves small in order not to have those laws applied to them. But this becomes absurd, because France needs its companies to grow, and it needs to support its entrepreneurs. So you don't want to have a system that in the end discourages people from companies from employing and from companies from growing. That's what France's wealth depends on.
You say that you're seeing signs that the French are ready now to have this conversation. Just recently, the French president went on television saying he's going to have to cut 30 billion euros from the budget, make 30 billion euros in savings, excuse me. That's not chump change. But do you think he's going to follow through on what he promises?
I think he will, and I think he has to. And I think that if France, for a minute, eases up on that commitment, I think there again, you talked about market sentiment, it will be sanctioned by the market. So I don't think there's any choice. I think the difficulty is that those keeping to those numbers is going to involve some pretty painful decisions. There will be cuts in certain areas, and the difficulty for the president now is that because none of this was a subject of the campaign, it makes it all the more difficult to put it into place now. What I'm hoping with this book, which is written in a very simple French, in a way that I'm hoping makes it accessible to a sort of wider audience, is to try and show that, although it looks hard and although these things look tough, other countries have done that. Canada's a good example. Countries that share France's sort of social system, which is based on solidarity and reducing inequalities and really focusing on things that set it apart from the Anglo-Saxon model. Other countries like Canada have been able to cut their public sector by 15% under Jean Chrétien in the past. For example, Sweden has done the similar sorts of things. It's not impossible. It's difficult. Of course it's difficult, but it's not impossible.
Sweden's population 10 times smaller than that of France, and France is France. You mentioned yourself in the book how there's this tradition of the government having a hand in the way the economy runs, dating back to the 17th century.
It is difficult, but I think then it becomes sometimes a pretext for not doing anything. If you say it's difficult and the French will never accept it, I do think there has been a sort of recognition, and the Eurozone crisis, because it's so serious and because it has been so tough and because growth is not there, the French economy is on the verge of recession, because of all those factors, there has been, I think, a recognition in public opinion in France that things have got to change. And I think, therefore, there is a fantastic opportunity for France to really do something this autumn.
All right, Sophie Petter, if they make you the Minister for Industrialization or whatever it is, what would be your first task? What would be the first thing you'd do?
I think the first thing I would do is to reduce social charges on the payroll. And that is the biggest deterrent for these companies. The small companies that I've visited, I've cited in the book examples of an umbrella factory, which I've been to visit several times now, which is with all the best will in the world, wants to employ more people and create more business, but it just costs so much because social charges weigh so heavily on labour. Bring those down and let those entrepreneurs create the wealth, and that's what France needs.
All right, a great conversation starter if you read French, and hopefully soon out in English. Le déni français, the French denial, the last, how would you translate that?
Spoiled children.
The last spoiled children, not spoiled brats, excuse me, of Europe. Sophie Petter, thanks for joining us. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 interview.